Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Marielle Schubert, 3-time experienced gestational surrogate and the intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor, where our aim is a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey for all. Today, I'm excited to have 4-time surrogate Stormy with us, and today's topic is Interview with a Surrogate. We're going to talk with Stormy about her 4 journeys and kind of what that looks like, and we're just going to get into it. Hi, Stormy.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Of course, we love having surrogates on the podcast, and it's not every day that I meet somebody who has done more journeys than me, so it's great, and I think that you will have a lot of insight to share, so we are excited to kind of just get into things. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your family and what made you want to do the crazy surrogacy thing in the first place?
Sure. I kind of feel like I've been around this area for a while. I found this later on in my life. I wish I would have found it a little earlier, but I just never even heard about it. It was nothing. I've been married 21 years this year, and we have 2 kids, a girl and a boy. My girl's a sophomore in college, and my boy is a senior in high school. But when we started surrogacy, or when I looked at that, my daughter was only 8 and my boy was only 6. So my kids have kind of grown up with surrogacy and me being pregnant. But yeah, I really don't know. I just feel like the way I heard about it is I had an acquaintance. I didn't know her that well. She was much younger than me at the time. We went to church together, and she didn't tell me in life, but I saw on her social media, she said, I've always wanted to be a surrogate. And I was like, what? And she, like I said, she was much younger than me. She only had 2 little kids. And she basically said, I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think she was doing it on YouTube or something, but she would post and say I've always wanted to do surrogacy. I've been counting down until I had my own kids. We're all done. Our family's complete. My husband's on board. And I was just kind of like, what? I've never heard of this. So I was kind of a little obsessed, but I also was I don't know, not judgy, but I was shocked. I was like, she's so young and what is she doing? So out of more just intrigue, I was like, I'm going to watch everything she's doing. And, she would do the whole show all the shots and stuff. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I just kind of became more and more, I can't think of a better word than obsessed, but intrigued, obsessed. I would just watch her stuff, and then I started looking for anything I could find about it. But I did kind of feel back then, and I think it's gotten better, but back then when you looked, you really kind of couldn't find a whole lot. I got to a point where I'm like, wow, I've done all the investigation I can on my own. And I basically felt like I can't move forward until I talk to somebody an agency or something, because I've looked and found all the information I can on my own. And so, and I had not mentioned it to anybody at that point. And so at that point, when I was like, okay, we can't move forward unless I talk to somebody, then I approached my husband about it, which that's a whole nother episode, but we can touch on that. But yeah, I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll start to talk about this. But yeah, that's kind of, so just a girl sharing her journey is how I found out about anything surrogacy. I knew nothing about it before.
Yeah, so she kind of planted the seed for you. I think that's awesome. And it is intriguing when you see somebody doing it to kind of follow their story, because it is, I've done it 3 times myself. It is a weird thing, it's and different, right? It's not every day that you meet somebody who's going through it or willing to go through it. And so, yeah, it is very intriguing. And I think that's really cool that you were able to kind of see it unfold firsthand and really take that to heart. So you start looking, and you're like, okay, maybe now's the time to talk to my husband. Do you find an agency, or do you go independently? What did your first journey kind of look like?
Yeah, I started researching agencies, and it's funny because I always tell this story and I just think it made a huge impact, which it's funny. I always talk about surrogacy is such a ripple effect, right? You do these things and you don't realize, wow, this is going to change the whole path of my life. And it really did. But back then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start looking at agencies or whatever, call the first one. And the lady that answers, we're still friends. And this was a long time ago, 12 years ago. We're still friends, but she answers, we talk for an hour and a half. She just starts telling me, I just have a million questions, and we just got along really, really well. And basically what she said to me is, look, there's a lot of good agencies out there. There's a lot of bad agencies out there. Even if you don't choose me, I just want you to use me as a sounding board. I have more information than, like in the nicest way possible. And so I was like, yeah, thank you, and then we hung up. And then every agency I called after that, I just kept thinking about her because I was like, man, she was, so I definitely, now fast forward 12 years, I work in the industry. I definitely model my, the way I talk to people too. I kind of feel like her now, right? Like I've been around, I did my 4 journeys with 4 different agencies, not on purpose, not planned. They were all kind of unique. I didn't even know I was going to do 4 journeys. I do one step at a time. So yeah, I mean, after I called, I maybe called 3 or 4 more. And then I'm like, why am I calling? She's who I want to like talk to. And, luckily I talked to her. She was my intake, my journey coordinator. Like we're still, and she's still there. So, I mean, I just think that speaks volumes for when you're, a good solid agency that, she's still there, still doing her thing and still just like she was before. So I love that. But yeah, so I talk to her. And then I felt like too, with talking to my husband, had so much information. I thought that would be just really, really helpful for him and anybody else that I had to kind of convince.
Yeah. And I think that's really a huge thing when it comes to choosing an agency is you don't know what you don't know, right? And having somebody who's truly in it for the right reasons and that agency, and that's always what we say to women too when they're going through our screening process, and I do the intake. That's what I always say, like whether you go with us or not, like that's your choice. Like, but we really just want to make sure that you're going to a good agency that's going to take care of you and that's ethical, because sadly, not every agency is an ethical one, and I hate that. You should never feel like a number. Surrogacy should never feel transactional. And there's a lot of different things like that. And I think that speaks volumes for her and the agency that you were with, that she was more focused on you and you having a safe and ethical journey than doing that with them specifically. And I think that is huge. And that's really what it's all about, because surrogacy is such a beautiful thing when it's done ethically and correctly. And it's so scary when you first start out because you don't know, you hear horror stories and you don't know who's a good one and who's not, and just that initial vibe that you get, it can definitely set the tone for your entire journey moving forward. So that's great. So tell me, so you go back with her. You said that you might have needed a little help convincing your husband. So you go to your husband and you say, hey, I follow this girl online and she's been doing surrogacy. What do you think? Was he just like, what was his initial reaction?
Yeah, I think to understand where my husband's coming from, you just kind of have to know his personality or know people like him, right? I'm very much a sunshine and roses. Everything's going to be fine. Like glasses half full. I never really think about like how. It's just like, well, we're going to do it. It's just going to be fine or whatever. My husband's the opposite, right? So you have to have those opposites. He's definitely like a worst case scenario. Let's look at everything. So, I mean, he was just kind of like, what, like, why? And I was like, well, because I want to, I just think this, and he's like, I just don't understand. Like, you have to. So, I mean, we went through, it took several conversations, and I tell girls that all the time. It took I would say like 5 or 6 conversations of, just kind of him really, he just had to, like, he's like, I have to understand why. I don't understand. Is this like a money thing? And I was like, God, no. So then he was like trying to show, and then he's like, well, I want you to Google like worst case scenarios and like, look at these. And I was like, yes, so we kind of like did that and went through, and then I would have questions for the person I was talking to, so we kind of went back and forth until finally one day he was just kind of like, okay, we're going to do this. Like, I'm just going to, and I mean, this is kind of how we did our first journey. And I always think it's like a leap of faith because we would get so many questions. I mean, even him, all the questions he asked me, I didn't have all the answers. I was like, I don't know, babe, I've never done this. I just know I want to. So, a lot of our questions, our first journey was kind of like, we don't know what this will look like, but we're going to do it. So it was kind of exciting. And like, we both were in the same, I mean, I had friends ask me like, well, how do you think the kids are going to do? Like, how are you going to feel? I can guess. And I can say that this is what, I've heard, but I have no clue. I have not been through this. So we're just going to take it as it comes, And then I think after you do it, you realize, oh, like now I know exactly, and now I can kind of, but again, it's so unique that I would hate to assume how I felt and how my kids responded is how everybody's going to, but yeah. And I mean, well, here, I could talk the whole time, but yes, so I talked to my husband and then we started moving forward with that, journey. And we, like I said, we went into it I didn't think like, oh, are we going to do this tons of time? I just was like, we're just going to do this. We matched, they showed us a couple, we loved them, we fell in love with them. And so we were like, they were somewhat close to us. So they went to like all of our appointments with us. And again, at the time, I think you never really realize how special that is and that journey is unique because, well, I guess my bookends were similar. So they went with all the appointments. They were pretty close. Well, yeah, you can go ahead and ask. I'll sit here and talk the whole time.
No, but that's what this is. We're learning about the journey. So by all means, that's what we want to hear. And I think that's a good point to kind of jump off from is that every journey is different, and sometimes intended parents are close and able and wanting to go to all appointments, and some are not close. Some don't want to. My first journey was unsuccessful for intended parents, and they lived maybe 2 hours from me. But my intended mom had a lot of trauma associated with pregnancy, and she had a lot of miscarriages. And so she was not able to mentally be there for any of the early appointments because she didn't want to get invested. So even though they were super close, she just wasn't at a place where she could attend any of the appointments in the very beginning because she just was rightfully very nervous. And so and that's what I always tell women in our screening, just because they're close in proximity doesn't necessarily mean more involvement. You know, I had intended parents from France who were way more present and involved than my ones who were very close to me. Now I had the benefit of one of the dads working for an airline, so they were able to, easily do that. But they were international and they were way more involved physically in my pregnancy than somebody who's close. So that doesn't necessarily mean much. But we can talk a little bit about that. Like, how was that having them at every appointment? Is that something that you expected or wanted, or was it too much, or kind of how did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just had a question. Your mom, or the intended mom, she was open with you about that? Like she said, or did you like figure that out later? Like when you were in the journey, she was open about her feelings about that and stuff?
Oh, about not being able to be?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. She was very clear. She didn't want to know the results of the beta test. She didn't want to know the results of the ultrasounds until after we had passed the 9-week mark. Then she wanted to know. So that was very hard to know that I was pregnant and that things were happening, but she didn't want to know. And then I did end up having 2 miscarriages during that scary window for her. And that was hard as well when I started bleeding, and we went in after a double embryo transfer, and I had miscarried one of the embryos, but not the other one. So we went in thinking the worst, and we're like, oh, nope, here's a heartbeat, but we also have this. My agency coordinator was really great, though, with kind of helping me navigate that and respecting her wishes in that regard. But it definitely was hard, but she was, at least for me, very upfront about it. But I know not everybody could be. In my second journey with a set of traditional parents, I had a mom who had struggled a lot with that, and she was very disconnected from the whole process and wasn't super upfront about it, and it just felt kind of weird. And in her defense, I don't know how I would personally feel watching another woman carry my babies. I've carried them for other people, but I couldn't be in that position. So it's definitely each situation is very different, right? So yeah.
I think that's such a good point, though, the open communication and the transparency, if you can. I get that some people just don't, like, you're not even there to get that that's what's going on. But I mean, that transparency, I think, helps so much. I mean, when I compare, so I had my girls are my bookends, my girls are babies, and then boys in the middle. And then my couples that were most involved are on my bookends as well. And so my first journey, I mean, you really don't know anything. I remember it was pretty like we definitely bonded right away so that couple, they had lots and lots of loss, but they were the most positive, sweetest, happy. Like they always would tell me that this baby would just be like icing on the cake and that they are so happy in life either way. And they know they are so blessed. So there was not a lot of pressure with them. They were just so sweet. They only had 2 embryos. They were not their own. They were donated through many, many failed IVF cycles. A friend of theirs donated 2 of their embryos to them. So they only had 2. When we defrosted the first one for embryo transfer, it did not make it. So their last one. So then it was just 1. Now, thank God I didn't really understand what that meant back then, because I was like, okay, like I didn't really think that. Now I would have been like crazy pressure for just their last embryo. But, it took, and we were pregnant, and they were great. They were super supportive. And so me having, like, I didn't really know any different than them being I knew they lived close. I knew their goal was to be at all the appointments. So, I mean, they're not overbearing. I mean, just the sweetest, like almost the most perfect people you could think about. They're just so cute and happy and like, so it was a great, successful journey. The only twist, and I feel like every journey, even if it's the best experience, there's always ups and downs, weird things. Like it doesn't matter. A picture perfect journey is going to have this is a unique situation. And so something that we did not see coming in kind of through us is that I had my baby's vaginal. I'd never had a scare of a C-section, never thought that in my wildest dreams. We go in for, delivery, everything's going on. I'm, in labor all day long but then I started getting a little paranoid. Like they were like, oh, you kind of hear stories that they're not going to let you just labor all day long. Like pretty soon they're going to start talking. And I was like, this is kind of taking a long time. Like what's going on? And my nurse was kind of being weird. And finally she goes, yeah, I don't know. Something's off. And so she got the doctor in there. And so anyways, they basically were like, yeah, C-section. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And I mean, the mom knew I didn't want a C-section. She didn't want a C-section. We're both bawling. She's like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, no, it's okay. But I get a C-section. It turns out the cord was wrapped around her ankles, so she was just like bungee jumping back. So I mean, we were so thrown. I mean, I guess just in my wildest dreams, because I am such a rose, sunshine, nothing's gonna happen. I was like, how did this happen? And it was really hard. I think emergency C-sections are harder. Fast forward, I've now had 3 C-sections. So, I mean, now I'm like, whatever. But, I mean, when it's not something you're expecting, I mean, I remember I was so skeeved out by the thought of it that me and my husband just put our foreheads together and I closed my eyes. And I remember the mom goes, Stormy, look, she's beautiful. And I'm like, I'll look later. I wouldn't even open my eyes. And I mean, we went to recovery that way. And then finally after recovery, I was like, okay, I can process that this actually happened. I'll look at the baby, but I mean, if you would have asked us leaving the hospital if we would do another journey, no way. I mean, we were like, that was insane. Like we'll never, yeah, right. A year later, I'm like, so well, let's talk about this.
Yep. And that is a very, very typical response, as you know. And yeah, I understand you never think about how it works because generally, especially as first-time surrogate, to even qualify to be a surrogate, you have to have very healthy, uncomplicated pregnancies and deliveries, which means you're not necessarily anticipating any of that. Mm-hmm. In the case of my first journey, I'd never had a miscarriage before. So that was like the farthest thing from my brain of even happening. And I couldn't understand why my intended mom couldn't get excited about the first pregnancy test and why she couldn't get excited. And then it happened the first time. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then the next time, and then I kind of brought that, I guess that trauma or that kind of angst into all the rest of them because it finally happened to me. And that's the thing. You got to kind of expect the unexpected when it comes to these things. And it can be the perfect journey and still end perfectly, beautifully with a baby. But, expect the unexpected is definitely, it. So your first journey was was it a traditional couple, it sounds like? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were all of yours traditional couples, or did you have kind of a mix of couples in there?
No, yeah, they were all traditional couples, except for, I mean, besides being international was the only little whoa, this is crazy. But yeah, my second journey was international. They were the sweetest couple ever. I lived in California at the time. So they actually, it's kind of unique for an international because they actually stayed in California near, rented a condo or whatever and stayed pretty much my whole pregnancy. I mean, she only had to leave me. The mom spoke perfect English and the dad did not. It was funny. She would always say she didn't speak good English. And I'm like, you speak perfect. I can understand every word you're saying. She knows all of our, American jokes and stuff. So she would constantly educate me about like everything we did. She would be like, "This is not how it is in China." Like she would kind of explain. So I got lots of education about how it is there and then versus here. She was always dumbfounded about like just the great care I got. Like when we would go to an OB appointment, she's like, she couldn't get over that we go to a doctor's appointment at a certain time. She would explain to me that in China, you show up at their technology was way behind where she was. She's like, this is what our ultrasounds look like. You couldn't see anything. She'd say you would go to the office, just sit all day. Maybe you'd get seen, maybe you wouldn't. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So she was just kind of dumbfounded at all the attention I got and, just how well we were treated and stuff. But yeah, she stayed with me. She only had to leave me once during the pregnancy and she felt so bad, but she was coming right back. I'm like, you are fine. So she came right back.
So
and
they
then
were in the States. They were international, but in the States for the duration of your whole pregnancy.
she was. The husband had to keep working. So she was here with her parents. So I actually had grandma with us too, grandma and grandpa and her. And that's kind of a unique situation too. She approached me right after we matched, before I had done a transfer. She said, hey, this craziest thing happened. And I'm like, yeah, what's going on? And she's like, well, you know how I've explained to you how the care is in China. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, when I came here, the IVF doctor, she's very close with him. She's like, he examined me and he told me, he's like, I can tell you exactly, I can see why you're not getting pregnant. And I'm almost confident I can get pregnant. She said, but we had already met you and we already kind of put our heads around the fact that this is the way we were going. So she's like, but now that keeps aching at me that he's saying he could do it. And so she's like, would you care if she goes, I don't believe that it'll work, but do you care if I try since he's saying that? And I said, yeah, I mean, I don't, as long as, I said really the only like constraint I had was that if you don't get pregnant, like let's say he's wrong and you don't get pregnant and I do, I just want you to be happy for this pregnancy. Like, I don't want you to be sad. And she was like, oh yeah, no, of course. Like we've already wrapped our heads around this. So he was definitely right. She transferred and she got pregnant. So we were pregnant. She was supposed to be due, I want to say like, she was 2 or 3 months behind, somewhere around there. So nowhere near. It was like no worries about my due date and her due date. And we chugged along pregnant. I felt so bad because of course I had, very easy pregnancies. That's probably why I like being a surrogate. I was, I like, my husband jokes that I love being pregnant. I'm happier and all that stuff. Yep. She was very, very sick. And then, just the culture, like to her mom and dad would say like, see, this is why like you shouldn't be pregnant. Stormy should be pregnant, like kind of comparison. I was like, no, that's not nice. Like you're very, that's not, everybody has different journeys. This is great. I would be the one celebrating her more because I don't know, they were just a little bit more harsh and kind of gave her a hard time because they would be talking. I'd be like, what'd your mom say? And she'd say, oh, you're healthy and I'm not. She was pointing that out. And I was like, no, that's not true. I was like, that's not, we're just different, people and stuff. But she had to like go to the hospital a lot and get like IVs and stuff. So kind of a crazy twist that people would think like, well, you'll probably never do a journey after that. But you just kind of roll with it. I went into labor. So I was at the hospital or whatever, and I'm waiting for them to come or whatever. And then I get word from, at the time, the agency that I went with for my second journey, she became a really good friend of mine too. Very small, intimate agency. I get a call from her and she's like, are you sitting down? I was like, well, I'm in labor, but yes, I'm sitting down. And she's like, she's in labor as well. And I'm like, what? It's like first of all, like I was worried because I was like, that's super premature. Yeah. She was kind of high intense. And my true belief is that she stressed herself into going into labor that day. I don't think that, I think it was just pure stress. Yeah. But so I was pretty upset, of course. I was like, okay, great. She's not. And then mom and dad were with her. And in Chinese culture, it's very common. They hire like a nanny that stays with them. They have like very strict kind of like cultural tradition guidelines that you don't like do. The mom doesn't do really anything for the first like 30 days. So the nanny does everything. So, the parents went with the mom and then I was sent the nanny who, at the time I was not very happy about. I was like, I don't even know who you are. She didn't speak English, so I was like, I was pretty upset, but a big, huge shining light. My husband was there, but the agency owner, again, I said it was very small. She's my friend. She came with me. She stayed my whole delivery with me. And towards, we cried about things. We vented about things. She was frustrated too. But by the end, we were laughing and we're like, it just kind of is what it is. You know what I mean? It's still going to be beautiful. Grandpa came over the next day afterwards. The nanny did like amazing with her. She was with him. She was totally like, it seemed, it didn't make me uncomfortable. Like when I saw them, I'm like, oh, he's fine. Like she's loving him, spoiling him, bringing him into me, like it was totally, what I wanted her there. Yes. But in the end, it didn't, we were kind of like, it is what it is at this point. It's not, but I definitely felt all the emotions but it helped, to have the owner there with me, my husband there with me and then afterwards I went and saw her because they were there and stuff. So it was still Still loved it, but definitely different.
Yeah, for sure. And again, kind of shining a light on why choosing the right agency is so important, because not only do they help match and manage your journey, sometimes they are that emotional support for you. And when, poop hits the fan, and you need somebody there, having an agency that is willing and wanting to be there for you is huge. And I think that just speaks wonders, again, to your choice in agency. So, okay, totally different journey second time around with being pregnant at the same time as your intended mom, who was international but local at the same time. So that's definitely an interesting one. And I know we've still got 2 left, so bring it on. Talk to me about number 3.
Yeah, well, and the cool, like, it's kind of a good place to transition because I lived in California at the time. So after that journey, I never leave a journey thinking like, okay, let's go. Like, I'm just kind of like, okay, that was an end and we'll kind of see and and that, that owner of that agency, we were really close after that. So we started talking about, the company was very, very small at the time. And she was like, I'm just talking about me and her were very close. So we started having meals and like kind of talking around what would that look like if I started working there. And she's like, I'd never want to bring you on so it was kind of like this ongoing conversation. So I was very excited. I was like, okay, I'm probably going to start, working there. I love this agency. I'm super excited. So it was kind of transitioning my brain that way. I wasn't even thinking about another journey. And then my husband got an opportunity, and I have family over in East Coast in Virginia, and my husband had an opportunity. We're kind of in the Nova area, which is like next to DC. So nowhere, we were not looking, but all of a sudden, very quickly, we went for a month during the summer to visit, and then came back, and within like 2 weeks we had an offer and we're like moving. So it all happened very, very quickly. So I went from possibly working in that, like, once I moved, I'm sure you're pretty familiar, but I'll explain it. Virginia is a post birth order, very backwards. It's pretty much treated like adoption. So very, very different. So, the talks of me working, and before COVID, remote was not a thing. So, talks all died of that. Like, she was like, I'm so sorry, but California and Virginia are night and day. And I was like, no, I hear you. So that kind of ended. And then we kind of were adjusting here. And then I fast forward, started thinking about another journey, reached out to her. She was like, none of my IP, they're too scared of the post, like nobody. So I was like, okay, so, moving on to another agency, which I would have probably just stayed with her had she had IPs that were, comfortable. But went with another agency that I actually ended up loving too, and made like a lot of friends there. Went for a third journey. It was a Chinese couple as well. Super sweet. They were, funny enough, people think like, oh, well, if they didn't speak English, like how could you possibly close with them? No, they did not speak an ounce of English, and they were the same age as me and my husband. And I can't even really describe how connected we were. They definitely made an effort. They came out as often as they could. And then just with like Google Translate, I don't know, you could really, the way we think, it was very interesting to me. I was like, you could have never told me that we would have been so close. We laughed and joked. We have the same sense of humor, the same thoughts, the way we raise our kid, like just very similar. I'm like, this is just insane. And we can learn this even when we don't even speak English. So very, very close with them. They were obsessed with my kids. My kids have kind of been with Olive, but this couple especially, they just loved my kids, and my kids really, really loved them. So I would definitely say my last 2 couples, my kids were older too, but they're definitely more bonded with my last 2 couples. But yeah, that one was kind of, I don't think there's always like things. The only thing that was really like is, because it is post-birth, I didn't know any of that. So I'm in the hospital and I'm used to, I don't sign as mom. I don't, this is all, well, in a post you do. So the hospital's like, I just had a baby and I'm tired and stuff, and the hospital's coming in and they're like, we need you to sign all these things. And I kind of start freaking out. And I'm like, I'm not signing this stuff. No, I'm not the mom. And so then I had to call my agency, and they're, in California. And so I'm trying to explain, and they weren't sure either. Like, they didn't really, maybe I don't remember, but it was like confusion. And luckily my husband was not in the room, because he kind of gets a little bit like, what is going, but finally they were like, Stormy, it's fine. Just go ahead and sign the paperwork. And I was like, okay. So I signed it, and that our parents did end up having to stay here quite a bit longer because of that. I want to say gosh, I'm so bad about details, but I know it was longer than a month. And I had, they asked me, do you mind like getting our Airbnbs? Because we don't understand. And I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, not paying for them, but like helping her
Yeah.
pick them out. So I got one, and I've never had this happen to me on Airbnb, but it was like a bait and switch. Like the pictures that I did in the area and everything, when they got there, it was nothing like that. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And I didn't want them staying there. So they just
Yeah.
came and stayed with us until we figured out a new Airbnb situation. So I don't know. Some people might be like, well, that's crazy. We loved it. We didn't mind at all. We had so much fun. So,
Yeah.
and then I fixed the Airbnb and got them, and they stayed in Airbnb. We saw each other and lots of visits, but I feel like pretty non-eventful, pretty easy, besides the post, but they were so patient and just
Yeah.
they had such great attitude the whole time.
So, and that's awesome. I love that they were able to stay with you and that you all felt comfortable enough to do that. That's amazing. And again, just how different it is. So just from a logistical standpoint, and just for anybody listening who may be in a post-birth order state, was that not brought up during legal or not discussed with you? Or was it kind of one of those like, yeah, you just kind of sign everything and you don't really think about it until it's one of those things you don't know what you don't know, and you didn't necessarily realize, yeah, they may have
Exactly.
said it, but you didn't know what it meant. So, like, do you have any advice on that kind of
Yeah.
moving forward, or how you would have
Yeah,
handled
I
it?
mean, I don't know. Having worked, I mean, you nailed it on the head. What you said is like, oh, you're just like, because I think just given my personality the way I am, that I am kind of like, yeah, that's great. It'll work out. Like, logistics and like details like that. Sometimes my personality, because I'm so positive, I'm like, that's fine. Like, that's no big deal. I think I'm sure it was probably explained to me. And like, but I didn't really catch that, I didn't realize that it was, so yeah, it was kind of one of those things where I just felt very thrown off. And I, even now working in the industry, I do feel like I have, like, there's women that think like, and I totally have like empathy for it, because I am that way. Like a lot of times I'm just like, yeah, like yes is always my initial. I always want to say yes. I always want to. So it's helpful to have a husband like mine that will be like, well, hold on a second. What does that even mean? Like, so I think that, some personalities, they don't even think about things like that. And then other people are very more like detail. Hey, wait, I need to understand everything going on before. So, yeah, I think it was probably a combination of that, but you're right. I mean, thinking about it, the details sometimes get away from me, but yeah, I mean, even when I reached out to my agency, and it's no shade on them or anything, but they were even a little bit like, well, hold on, we don't really know. Like I don't know if maybe I didn't do a good job of explaining it, but there was like a moment where they were like, we don't know what to do. We'll call you back or whatever, but don't sign anything yet. So I wasn't. And then it was like, okay, go ahead, sign whatever, I just had a baby. I was probably like, just in hysterics, not even making sense on the phone.
And I think that's another good point to point out too for women starting their journeys, or maybe even in the middle of them. You can have the best agency and everything, but you still have to kind of advocate for yourself and make sure that things are taken care of. And each state is different, and so having these like kind of lists of things or questions to ask your lawyer when you're going through legal, or ask your agency, like, okay, now it's getting time towards delivery. What do I need to prepare for? Do I need to sign the birth certificate? And just kind of having a birth plan is very different as a surrogate than it is for a mom who's going to be having the baby. For a surrogate, a lot of times birth plan should include a lot of logistics, things like that. I was the opposite. I was kind of crazy about making sure everybody had mine. I was like calling like before my scheduled C-section. I was like, listen, like I'm coming in on this day. I am a surrogate. I just want to make sure that you have a room for my intended parents, that you have all my legal paperwork. I brought printed copies of it all because I was just scared of something like that happening. Like I wanted to make sure that I had everything taken care of. But again, that was which is weird. In life, I'm a very laid back person, like go with the flow, but somehow during surrogacy, this like type A person like inhabits my body, and I'm like, I don't know who you are, but like if you could come back for like other parts of my life, that would be great. But I was very like meticulous, but just kind of understanding the process and the questions that you should be asking, because you wouldn't think necessarily to ask that. And it can be overwhelming when you're signing contracts, and a lot of times with an agency, and even without, like you're just like, okay, sign this. This is your legal, is what you do. You don't know that you're supposed to ask about other things, and so feeling okay to ask those questions and knowing kind of what to ask, because everything is different, I think is definitely a good point to make. There. And so those were your two international, were from China.
Yeah.
And then your fourth and final journey, let's hit that one.
Yeah, I think that one's kind of unique too, just because I after my third, I kind of started like, okay, I think I'm older now. I'm kind of done. We I had, the C-sec. So my first journey was an emergency C-section. Second one was VBAC. I always wanted to VBAC, so I was very happy that that happened. Third one, I wanted to VBAC. It was a C-section again. So I was kind of like, okay, we've kind of done our C-section thing. I think I'm good. So I kind of like was more focused on working again in the industry. Again, this was before COVID, before 2020. So calling around, I mean, I remember after my journey ended, I don't remember what, it was probably 2018 or something. I was calling around asking every connection I had, hey, I know I could make this work remote. I'm telling you, and they're like, I hear you. I love that idea. But like, we just feel this has to be in, so I was like, okay. So started working at my kids' school, kind of loved that. And just, I was doing like tours and like, whatever. So kind of got into that. 2020, well, actually it must have been before 2020. So I start working at the school or whatever. And that's what it was. One of my friends here. So we're actually foster parents too. So a lot of which that could be a whole nother episode too, but I really feel like foster parents and surrogate parents, same heart, but just
Absolutely.
Different road, but same heart.
Yep, absolutely.
A lot of my foster parents, I feel like, man, you could be a surrogate. Yeah. So I met this local foster parent that became one of my friends. She reaches out to me. It must have been 2019 Valentine's Day. Yeah, I remember that. She reached out to me and she was like, hey, or maybe it's 2018. It might have been 18. But anyway, she reached out to me and said, hey, I have these friends that I want you to talk to. And I was like, okay, like about what? And she was like, well, like Sarah. And I was like, girl, I'm retired. Like you don't want, I said no. And I just in my head, I was thinking it's going to be some like couple that knows nothing about surrogacy. I just can't. I've done this too many journeys, like, blah, blah. So she's like, please just meet with them or whatever. And I thought for sure my husband was going to say no. So I'm like, oh, but so it turns out like they had 2 kids and they were going to be gone. I think our kids and their kids were going to be gone on this one weekend. And so I asked my husband, his name's Aaron. I said, Aaron, what do you think? He said, okay, let's at least meet with them. Of course, we like fall in love with them. They're the exact same age as us. Her husband and my husband do similar things. Me and her, just all the things. So I was like, there's no way we can say no to them. Like, there's just no way. We both left going, we're doing it again, I guess. So, I mean, they were very close to us locally, obviously. She was amazing. It kind of reminds me of like what you were saying, your mom. She was able to be there. She's a counselor. So I think she works through a lot of hers, but she's very open. And something that she said with me that just struck me and stays with me. And I share it with anybody I talk to, girls wise, doing journeys and stuff. But we were I think because I had done so many journeys, we were very comfortable with each other. I was a lot more candid and open and would say things, and I was older. So I would like complain and like tell her things that I probably wouldn't have told my other journeys. But, I would just, if I was like not happy with something or whatever, and she was at all my appointments. So she saw, firsthand or whatever. So my OB was my really good friend and we were on VBAC schedule, all the same things. One of the appointments, she kind of had the similar thing where like, she just wouldn't seem to get excited. And I'd be like, girl, like, come on, like what are, and she would and so at first she wouldn't really say much, but she would just hear me and stuff. And then she'd be like, well, we have, whatever. And then I remember this one time I must have got like really frustrated and maybe pushed a little bit more and said like, this is kind of bugging me that like, you guys are not like, this is real. This is happening. Like, why aren't you guys? And she's like, Stormy, she's like, look, I understand where you're coming from. I don't feel like you leave much room for where I'm coming from. She goes, you realize that your life has been very different than ours. Your life is, you want to get pregnant, you get pregnant, you have kids, you want to go, you do these transfers, they take, and you're pregnant. That's not our story, Storm. She's like, we've had every corner is loss. Every time. They had a surrogate before me that was pregnant with twins and they passed away at 27 weeks. Oh. So, I mean, she's like, do you get that? Like these anniversaries, I remember when she was telling me it's the anniversary of the boys, and it's like these things, that's not my reality. Like, so it was so helpful. Yep. She did it in the most loving way, but I mean, it kind of like a brick wall hit me like, and she said, you have to leave room for me, for my experience. And I was like, she's right. Like, she doesn't need to feel like I do. She doesn't need to be like as happy as I am. And you know what I mean? There's room for like how she feels. So that really helped. And I really appreciate her ever even telling me that, because it did just kind of make me, it almost made like my Sarah, the way I feel was like, I felt like, oh, this is 80% or whatever. When she did that, it hit me back to like, no, this is a 50-50 thing. You know what I mean? I have my area and how I feel, and they get just as much area, room for their feelings and their experience. And so I feel like that really changed me and, made me respond differently to, just that, like, before I kind of I don't know, the more you're right, what you don't know, you don't know. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I really didn't know that. And now I do.
Yeah, and I think preparing yourself for that of possibly having to kind of take on the trauma of your intended parents. Because I know, like with mine, like I said, I went into this very much like, oh no, like I get pregnant, you look at me, and I couldn't understand it. And then the more anxious she got, like even before my first miscarriage with them, she was like, well, how are you feeling? All of these things. And the more anxious she got, the more anxious that I got. And I'm like, should I be worried here? Like I didn't know any of that. And then it kind of kept going. And then obviously after I had the miscarriages for them, that transferred into every other one of my journeys, and I was not prepared for that, and I wasn't prepared to be anxious in the beginning of my pregnancies because I'd never known what that is. And so kind of preparing yourself for that, especially with traditional couples, most of the time they are not coming to surrogacy as their first stop in their journey to parenthood, and most of the time it's coming with some amount of trauma and loss. And again, as I've said, I don't know how I would feel watching another woman carry my child. And understandably, even if there is no pre-trauma to that, there's going to be some feelings even about that as a woman not being able to do that. And just kind of knowing that there's a lot of different types of dynamics that you may have to navigate. And I have seen, even in some of yours too, like that sometimes that doesn't exist at all and everything is just great and it's wonderful even with a traditional couple, and sometimes it's not, but just kind of understanding that going into it, your reality is going to generally be very different from your intended parents' reality, in how you got to this place. And sometimes that can be really hard to navigate because you're excited and you want to be excited and they're not, and you're like, well, okay, I guess we'll try for the next time. And sometimes that can feel a little defeating because you're doing this huge thing for them and they can't get excited. And so it's a weird place to kind of be for a while, but once you understand it, I guess, how about this, even if you understand it, you're still a person, and a pregnant person at that, who has feelings, and it can feel a little hurtful when they aren't excited, and that's okay too. There's just a lot of different dynamics that are at play when it comes to surrogacy, and that's what makes surrogates like yourself and myself and anybody else who has been, wants to be, or currently is such an amazing people to even consider doing it, because it is such a huge thing. It's not just as easy as getting pregnant, having a baby, and handing it over.
Nope. I know.
That's not it at all. And it is a lot to take on. And it's great that we are able to kind of talk about. Sometimes it's hard. It doesn't make it any less beautiful or worthwhile, but it can be hard for sure. And so you have had such an amazing and different range of journeys, and now you work in the industry. So do you have any advice that you would give women who are considering becoming a surrogate? Like, any advice that you have from your professional or personal standpoint?
Yeah, I kind of think about there's certain things I just kind of my slogans or things I feel really strongly about, and definitely don't do it for sure. I think you should if you're thinking about it. I wish I would have done it sooner, and almost everybody that I talk to wishes they would have found it sooner or started sooner or didn't wait so long. So I do think, do it if you're interested. Even a little bit of you thinks about it. Don't rush. I feel like so many times these journeys go flying by, and I always tell marinate in all the, even when you're, legal's taking forever, this, medical clearance, marinate in those, because it flies by, and then you're like, wait, my journey's over. I delivered. I remember, to me, when people ask what's the hardest part of surrogacy, when it's over, when journeys end, I'm like, no, what? Why did I blinked? That's not fair.
Everybody thinks it's handing the baby to their parents. I'm like, no, that part was easy. But once I stopped pumping breast milk, then I was like, oh, it's really over now. That was the hard part.
I think that's the hardest part. So I think, and the more you're looking at the next step, oh, I just got to do this or whatever, I think that's just no, I love the girls that are just like, open-handed, like I'm here for it. I'm trusting the process. I'm trusting the journey. I'm trusting the time. I'm not trying to rush anything. That's the best, that's the way to stay zen. I think most transfers, if you can stay as zen, I always tell my girls, be as zen as, I know it's easier said than done, but just kind of trust this, and it is what it's going to be, what it's going to be. And we're going to be here, whether it's positive or bad. I'm here, we're here, we got this together. You know what I mean? So I just think being present, being there, and not, as much as surrogacy will teach you patience, if not anything, right? It's constantly waiting, or hurry up and wait always, so just kind of enjoy the process. Take more pictures. I always tell them, I was guilty of this. I thought, well, it's not my baby. I don't need like all these pictures. I wish I would have documented my journeys more. I really don't have a whole, and as the years go by, I don't remember as much as the detail. And I'm like, why didn't I document that better? My last journey, I have a whole book. And I wish I would have done that the whole time, because they're beautiful. So yeah, definitely, I think that's my biggest thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's my biggest thing. Don't rush. Enjoy every moment.
Yep, and it's so true that there, in the very beginning, there is a lot of hurry up and wait. But man, once you get that legal clearance and meds start, it really does go quick. But getting there can feel painful. So when you said it goes by in a flash, I was like, what? How easy were your journeys? But yes, once that part comes, it definitely does. And I think that is wonderful advice. And, with that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I want to thank our very special guest, Stormy, for joining us for our chat today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com and modernparentmentor.com if you're interested in knowing whether surrogacy is right for you. And take our 2-minute easy quiz on our website if you're interested in becoming a surrogate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.